Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. We just had it announced recently that the Conservative Party of Canada will be having its national convention with a leadership review taking place in January 2026 in my home city of Calgary. There's going to be a lot of movement leading up to that, a lot of dynamics kind of shifting in the party leading up to that convention and leadership vote, as both Pierre Poilievre and his team jockey for position, as well as people who are trying to oppose him start trying to organize people to show up at convention and vote against him or make changes to the Constitution. And to break this down, a very complicated subject, I want to bring in somebody I know has a very neutral view on the party from the outside, and that would be Scott Hayward from the pro-life organization right now. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing pretty good. Thanks, Wyatt, for having me on. Really great to see you again.
I know you can have a sober minded, neutral view of how political parties operate because naturally the organization you and Alyssa Globe operate, you kind of are partially in favor of the Conservative Party in terms of it's the most pro life party in Canada, but you're not strangers from having to make criticisms of the party historically when they're not, doing the right thing. You'd maybe criticize the Liberal Party more, but they don't even attempt to be pro life. So oftentimes they're not even much of a subject to discuss. But I was just wondering, I guess, because you follow these things pretty closely,
Mhm.
from, I guess, in a nutshell, for those who maybe don't want to watch us talk about convention politics too much and they just want to know what the deal is and move on. What would you say the mood in the party is right now, and what would you predict is going to be an outcome of a leadership review at this point?
Yeah, just so people know out there, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers and listeners know this already, but for those that don't, just in case, a leadership review at the next biennial, because it happens every 2 years, policy convention for the Conservative Party of Canada, and this is for most political parties federally and provincially as well. Immediately after a general election, in this case, a general federal election, will have a leadership review only if the party fails to form government, which was the case in on April 28th, 2025, about almost 2 months ago as of today of this recording. So that's why there's going to be a leadership review. There was going to be a leadership review automatically of Andrew Scheer when the party failed to form government in 2019, and same for Aaron O'Toole in 2021 with that leadership convention or that policy convention probably not happening until 2023. That was the big controversy, right? Because they had an online convention in March of 2021, and it's biannual, like I said, so it's every 2 years. And so that's when Caucus had to step in through the Reform Act and kind of move the process along. So this is not what I'm trying to say is this is not something extraordinary. This is not something out of the normal. This is something that's been in the party constitution for quite some time. So he will face the question from delegates. So the people who get to vote on this question are members of the Conservative Party of Canada who are voted by their fellow party members in each of the 343 federal ridings across Canada, and each riding sends 12 delegates. There are 10 delegates elected by party members at a delegate selection meeting, and there are two ex officio delegates. One is the president of the Electoral District Association for the party, and the other is the member of parliament or the candidate of record if the party didn't win in that riding. So you're talking about probably upwards of around 3,500, maybe 4,000 voting delegates at the convention. Since it's, the end of January in Calgary, I'm going to guess that it's probably going to be closer to, 2,500, maybe 3,000 delegates. And in order for Pierre Poilievre to stay on as party leader, he just needs 50% plus one, technically, for there not to be an automatic, a starting of a leadership election within the party. Now, of course, as we all know, typically most political party leaders want more than just 50% plus one. They're looking for ideally a number that starts with an 8 or higher. I think Danielle Smith had 90% plus, the most recent one. And in Alberta, and a lot of provincial parties, this is the case. They have an annual general meeting as opposed to every 2 years. A little bit easier for provincial parties, right? Because you just have delegates from a province and not from across the country come to get together. So Pierre probably wants something that starts with an 8 at least. I would say, kind of 75% would be the minimum. Can he get that today? I would say probably he can get 75% today. Can he get that at the end of January 2026 in Calgary? That is a question. Like,
Well,
and
and people have to realize too, you can go online and in comment sections and see that everyone really likes Pierre Poilievre. But the thing is that that doesn't almost matter once we're going on to the riding by riding level,
very
and
good
each
point.
riding is sending in theory, the same number of delegates. Some ridings, if they're really far away and they don't care too much, might only send five. But if this becomes a convention that you could say is overrepresented by a lot of urban riding delegates, who in a previous video I characterized as potentially being the very pragmatic red Tories who would say, well, we'd like a Doug Ford to lead this party. If they show up, because again, Pierre cannot have it's not like the UCP in Alberta where if you're a member, you can buy a delegate pass
Right.
and you can show up. This is that it's limited numbers. So if there happens to just be an ideological kind of mixture in certain riding associations that cause people to have like very obtusely left-wing opinions, you could have a bunch of people show up to dedicatedly be voting no. And again, it doesn't take you that many in a room of only 3,500 people to start dropping below 80%. But what would you say, I guess, is maybe this is an easier thing, and then I'll give you something else. But what would you say is the magic number that Pierre Poilievre probably needs to be able to survive? Because he's going to have to hold on for a couple more years before there's a new election. So it's not just, let's give him another shot in 6 months. This is going to be, we're going to give him another year and a half at least, based on when I think the next election is going to happen. And then what do you think is the kind of competing interests and factions right now in this convention?
Yeah, I think in my mind at least, like the absolute bare minimum he would have to meet to feel relatively comfortable going forward would be 75%, three quarters of the party. So if you think about it, in the leadership race when he was facing four other opponents on the ballot, he got 68% of the vote for the party members right across the country of the 250,000 or however many cast a ballot in that leadership race. So now he's not against anybody, right? There's no other opponent on the ballot. The only thing that says and it's a secret ballot, right? So the only thing they will say on the piece of paper is, do you support the Conservative Party of Canada beginning a leadership election immediately? Something to that nature. I think it's within the Constitution. So it's not really a question about Pierre. It's, do you want to have a leadership race? Because in theory, if 50% plus one do vote that way, Pierre could run in that leadership race. I doubt that would happen, and I doubt that he would. So I think 75% is kind of your minimum. A number that starts with 8, I think he's really solid. And of course, the higher you go, the better it is. The different factions going to convention, like you said, like it's not just anyone can show up, any party member. You have to be elected at delegate selection meetings, which will probably start happening toward the end of this summer. Certainly, definitely after Labor Day. And then people go to convention for different reasons. Some might go to convention to support Pierre in that leadership vote. Some might go to that convention to vote against Pierre in that leadership vote. I think most people who go to convention, there's a group that just like to go to conventions, and it's a great opportunity for other conservatives to see other conservatives they haven't seen in years. And just have a good time and go to the hospitality suites and have some good discussion on policy and things of this nature. There are people who go to convention that are really focused on the internal party rules, and we'll talk about nominations and stuff like that. And they're there to do business, and they might be a little bit like me, and they're a little more agnostic, let's say, about the leadership question. And then there's people there for policy. Although I would um, suggest that the official policy declaration of the Conservative Party of Canada is actually quite solid. And there isn't a whole lot there's like one really big one I would change, like the one pro-abortion policy. But other than that, there's not a whole lot I would change about it. So you have people that have different motivations that are there. I don't hear of anything, and I'm certainly not involved, and our organization's not involved in any kind of movement to get rid of Pierre. I think if Pierre, doesn't make that 75% and gets a little bit lower, I don't think it's because people are organizing against him. I think it'll just because people who are there are just kind of, I don't know if this guy has what it takes to beat the Liberals and Mark Carney. And it's really hard to determine if that's going to, like, how much is that going to be of delegates that are there, like in the middle of June in 2025, when we're
January,
looking
but yeah.
January 2026, right? There's a half a year of a Carney Liberal government that has yet to happen. Like, we can kind of look at the polling trends post-election right now, and can we even project that to January? It's kind of hard to say that because obviously the Carney government is in a honeymoon. At the same time, the Carney government is very, very active and very successful so far on its files. Like they're operating pretty quickly. Does that continue into January to get more successes? So I think there's a bit of a danger because, like you said, like, it doesn't take that many to go to below 25%. If we're going to say, okay, there's 3,000 delegates that are there, and of the let's say all the delegates are going to vote, because you don't have to vote as a delegate if you don't want to on this leadership review question. You can even spoil your ballot if you'd like, but let's say all 3,000 delegates vote and they don't spoil their ballots. Well, if you're going to have 25% of them vote the other way, what's that? That's 600. That's 700 or so.
Yeah,
Of those,
750 out of 3,000 would be 25%.
yeah, of those delegates, like, you'd probably have at least a few hundred people that are going there to get rid of Pierre, because that's their motivation. I don't think it'd be much more than that, but then you only need to double that number. And if the biggest thing that he's going to have to fight, and the biggest thing I think he's struggling with personally right now, is just people are just apathetic toward him and the party as an extension.
And here's the thing, because again, I when I laid it out in a video previously, I said like there's a couple no factions. There's the Doug Ford, Corey Tenike no faction, and they're saying no because they want a winner as the leader, and the winner apparently is Doug Ford, even though Doug Ford wins because he has no opponents.
Right.
In Ontario politics is on super easy mode for Doug Ford. He's
Yeah.
running against like Stephen Del Duca, Kathleen Wynne, and Bonnie Crombie. This is like,
Merit Styles.
honestly, it's kind of like Alberta right now. It's like Naheed Nenshi is running against Danielle Smith and completely falling on his face. So I think that faction is what I'd consider completely unreasonable. They think like, let's just become the Liberal Party, then we can win. And it's like, well, then what's the point of winning? But then the other side, and like you can jump in here if you want, but I was saying the side that poses the greater threat to Pierre Poilievre is the soft nose who are saying, I want things changed in HQ. I want the way nominations and party candidate appointments that are the way that they're done to be changed. And I like Poilievre, but I might have to vote no if the stuff doesn't change or he's unwilling to fire some people. That's actually kind of the greater risk. It's funny how if he actually not that I don't think he can lose this thing, but if it gets close or it starts falling below 70%, it's not going to have as much to do with Pierre as much as it's going to have to do with HQ staff.
Which at the end of the day is Pierre's call. So like he is tied to that, right? He's not forced to keep Jenny Byrne. He's not forced to, be satisfied with the people that are hired in the Conservative Party of Canada headquarters by the Conservative Fund Canada, which of course he has sole discretion on who's on that board, which my understanding is only a 3-member board that controls like $100 million a year organization. The other thing too, someone described this to me very well. So like you can't attribute this to me if people think that this is a good description, but I think it's quite apt. The people who go to convention, right? Those party members who are attending convention, they're too high on the pecking order of the party, in so much in that they know too much, right? They know kind of, the nomination process was a bunch of BS, and dragging 90 plus ridings that didn't have a nomination into the writ period, so that as per the party rules, which is the case for most political parties federally and provincially, the executive director, the leader, gets to make an appointment and there's no nomination race, which is gross negligence, as you're describing on your video the other day, of you're banging the drums in the autumn of 2024 to have an election, and you're not at all prepared. No, they were prepared. They were just purposely dragging this into the writ period so that they could have their favorites that are appointed. So the people who go to convention know enough that you can't BS them on that stuff. At the same time, the people going to convention are not high enough in the party that they can be bought and paid for. They're not lobbyists. so that they have no financial interest. They're not going to see any financial benefit. They don't own companies that are going to be paid for by the party, because not all 3,000 delegates are, making commercials and running door knocking campaigns, like have companies that run door knocking campaigns or calling campaigns or things of this nature. So they have no financial vested interest in it. They're really invested in the health of the party. And which is
Also, a lot of these people have been around since sometimes the 90s or the
yeah,
80s in conservative politics. So they are not going to be sentimental about
yeah.
who's oftentimes leading the party. And this doesn't mean people are cold either. Again, I would say if you were probably to do a poll of Conservative Party members of what they think about Poilievre, he'd probably have a 90% approval rating.
And you do
But
see that.
that 10% who disapproves is going to be disproportionately the people who've been
Exactly.
sitting on boards for decades. And when something's not being done right, they're far more likely to raise their hand and say, well, what the heck, guys? And so, but so they're not going to be exactly dazzled by set pieces and theatrics. They're going to want to peek behind the curtain and say, why is this person still employed after failing? Why is this practice not being done? And so I would say a big risk to Poilievre is that in the next several months before January, if nothing changes about how the party operates, it's going to be harder to convince people to say, let him have another chance because we'll beat the Liberals next time, having changed nothing about how we work. You're
Yeah, like
basically just betting on the NDP comes back, takes most of their vote from the Liberals, and then you somehow win. Because my pet peeve in politics right now is hearing the line, we're the government in waiting. We're going to sit here and wait for Mark Carney to implode. And you're right. Do I like Mark Carney's policy in general? Not at all. At the same time, he's very good at doing things that make him seem moderate, that make him seem successful. Look, he's moving on all these files. And again, is he a good prime minister exactly? Do I think in the long run it's going to prove that he's good? No, but he's slightly better than Trudeau in many areas, maybe even significantly better in certain areas, like cranking the carbon tax down to zero and committing to now getting rid of it. You could say he stole that from the Conservatives to a non-sophisticate who's barely following politics day to day. They mostly follow entertainment, but they heard the carbon tax went away. Guess who they remember got rid of it? Carney. They're not going to sift through the ashes and find out that the Conservative Party had been banging the drum against it for years. They're just going to see that Carney did the right thing. And that's the dangerous part. Carney is not spectacular in the sense that he's not going to explode in a spectacular fashion. The man is either going to succeed and everyone's going to be like, oh, that seems, he seems to be doing a good job. Or or any failures are just going to seem like bureaucratic failures.
Yeah, I think we can project a few things right now, right? So like if you ask me like the convention is today and kind of having a sense of who usually attends the conventions and who would be there, I would say that Pierre Poilievre would probably get around 80% plus minus a little bit on that question, right? I don't know, like he could grow that 80% to like an 85, maybe even a 90. But he would have to make some very difficult decisions. He'd have to probably get rid of people like Jenny Byrne, which would be very difficult because they're very, very close for a variety of reasons. And they kind of grew up together ideologically and otherwise within the Conservative Party of Canada back from, the Reformed Canadian Alliance days. That's a very, like, they've known each other for well over 20 years. So like, that's a very big ask of him to make. It's a very personal thing for him to do. But you kind of have to make those decisions. I would also say, like, to get back to the carbon tax, where you're probably right, of the 20 million or so Canadians that voted in the last general federal election a couple months ago, already within like a couple months, you had a number of people saying, well, that guy put the rate to zero and got rid of the carbon tax, that guy being Carney. And one of the reasons why the Liberals were able to get away with that is because the Conservatives didn't take the policy win. The thing is that the Carney government is giving some policy wins over to the Conservatives, which is why they're pulling higher, which is why the Conservatives are pulling lower. But the Conservatives aren't taking advantage of it in terms of political communications. And I'm not a communications guy. I'm not going to pretend to be, but I know enough and I'm around enough politics to know, the missed opportunities. And there's a bunch of missed opportunities. So in addition to cleaning up some of the internal things, getting rid of some people, and why I would even say the leader probably should come out and champion some of the proposals to amend the party constitution to safeguard against these abuses. I think that would also go a really long way. I think he also has to change some of his political communications as well. And I would suggest definitely not watering down policy. If anything, I would go the other way. And I think you had mentioned there's going to be a group of people, at least a few hundred, that are going to go to this convention in Calgary to say, well, he's not moderate enough in his policy. I think there's also probably almost an equal number that would go that say, I'm sorry, but you need to actually take some policy stances that are conservative on issues that arise that aren't within the 3 or 4 issues that you want to talk about. For example, immigration. We're finding out now that some of the immigration numbers, it seems like, coming out of Statistics Canada, show some decreases in some categories, specifically with temporary foreign workers for the last 2 quarters. So already on this file, the Carney government, and frankly, it started under the dying days of the Trudeau premiership, are starting to move in, I would say, the correct direction on some of these files. And that window of political communications opportunity for the Conservatives to come in specifically on the issue of immigration to say something is now starting to close, because you're going to look like, again, you're once behind. So I think,
and this is why I keep telling them they should be running on 100,000 permanent residents a year cap, 100,000 temporary foreign workers with no extensions, and 100,000 students. That is it. And that's how they should be running on it. You need to have a big vision to run on. And I think that was what was lacking in the campaign in January.
yeah, and so to have that, Pierre's going to have to do more than just do the cleanup on the Constitution side and getting rid of certain people within his office in the OLO and Party HQ. He's also going to have to change his political communications a little bit. He's going to actually have to take some, I would argue, calculated risks and communicate on those issues. He's going to have to be a little bit better at responding to issues as they arise. That's the thing about being prime minister. Things happen, right? And things might happen that you don't like, and things might happen in files that you're not all that interested in. Everyone has different interests in different files. But as prime minister, you got to respond to everything, right? And if you want to be that government in waiting that you were talking about, you have to show that you can talk about everything, and you can talk about everything relatively quickly, and that you're representing, the views and values of your political party. So I think there's going to be an equal number of people who go to convention that are on the other side of the kind of those Doug Ford pragmatists that say, I want to see more. Like, that's great that you're against the carpet tax, so am I, but I want to see more. I want you to talk about more on other issues, other economic issues, foreign policy issues, military issues. Crime, he's been pretty good, but he doesn't really talk about it as much as he probably should. Cultural issues, social issues, right? And I think if he doesn't make those 2 changes, right? I think if he doesn't come in and say, okay, we're going to clean up 3 issues, I would say. We're going to clean up the personnel in the party in OLO. I'm going to, champion some of these proposed amendments to the Constitution to have some safeguards, especially around nominations. And I'm going to show you guys, maybe starting in the summer, but definitely having to start in the autumn, that I'm going to be a better political communicator. I think he can grow that 80% to closer to 90. At the same time, I think if he only moves on one of those files or none of them, which, there's a risk that would happen, I think that 80% can dip into the 7s. I don't know if it dips into the 6s, but I think it gets into an awkward 73, 74% of party members saying to go on. One of the other problems for Pierre is that he's not running against anyone. It's not like Doug Ford has an actual campaign that he's running and trying to win these delegate selection meetings, or a Jason Kenney or a Aaron O'Toole or whatever, right? There's no one out there. There's no camps. There's nothing, right? So if he gets a lower number, that kind of makes it a little bit worse. And I think there's the general sense I get is that I think there's just general apathy toward Pierre and the Conservative Party of Canada right now, because on so many issues that the party has championed for the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, the Carney government is moving on. Now, I think we can all probably agree they're not moving to nearly the extent that we would want them to move on, but they're definitely moving on it, especially in comparison to the Trudeau premiership.
Here's a good example on taxes. The Liberals are going to be reducing taxes. Is it enough? No, it's a pathetic 1% reduction in taxes under $50,000. But once that tax reduction is implemented, it's not going to have the same impact when the Conservatives come out and they say, well, we should cut it by another 1% like we were proposing to do in our platform. It's going to feel a little bit like really cutting around the margins. In the campaign, I thought that was a perfect example of like a missed opportunity. They ran on a 15% or 2.25 point reduction in the tax rate under $50,000, which isn't even that good because you don't even pay taxes on the first 18,000. So
Yeah,
it's
the
a
personal
reduction on the
exemption.
first $32,000 you make. Why not run on a 15% or even 25% reduction across the board, including corporate taxes? Bait the liberals in to attacking you for being the corporate guys by wanting to reduce corporate taxes, and then smack the crap out of them for wanting Canadian businesses to be outcompeted by American businesses who pay far lower corporate taxes. They should have done that. But there was like, again, and this is going to the campaign director in many ways. Obviously, the kind of buck stops with the leader, but Jenny Byrne, I find she's not a campaign manager or a national director. She is a risk manager. She basically just reduces risk and runs a campaign that's one track. And I'm thinking that this is the way we're going to win. So let's just stick to this message. And it's usually something mild. And it's usually on the theory that the other guys are going to mess up. And if we don't mess up, we're going to win. If the other guys don't mess up, then you're screwed. And especially if they not only don't mess up, but they actually catch a little bit of they catch a little bit of momentum, you're so dead in the water.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. They were hoping that Carney would implode, but Carney's not even interesting enough to implode. And that's his problem. So you got to run on a big vision, even outside of the election. You got to say
Yes.
immigration, 75% cut, taxes, 20% cut across the board. We're going to, and you actively run on cutting wasteful spending. You don't kind of like hide from the fact that you might cut wasteful spending potentially. You're like, no. Find departments and say, we're going to cut that one that nobody would disagree with cutting.
Yeah, and even if people do disagree, that's okay. You like this is the thing about the Conservative Party of Canada, that risk mitigation manager that you're describing Jenny as. And she's probably, to be fair to Jenny, she's probably one of the least worst in that category amongst a lot of those, I would say, professional conservative class that are always consultants and campaign managers, but always seem to fail at really achieving anything electorally or even in government. That's a really, really rotten mindset that is deep within the Conservative Party of Canada's psyche that needs to go. And Pierre would actually be a perfect candidate to start to get rid of that. And it's a little bit shocking that he hasn't, right? Like if you look at kind of the policy platform that he put together for the last, kind of 3 years leading into this last election, it's pretty like milk toast 1990s business New York Republican blah crap. It's just that he has like a Trumpian, or tries to at least have like a Trumpian personality around it. And that what it makes it seem worse than it actually is. But honestly, it was probably less of a conservative platform than we saw from like Andrew Scheer in 2019. So I think, and that's not necessarily the best of bars to begin with. So it's a mindset within the party that whether Pierre stays or goes, or whether Jenny stays or goes, I don't think them moving on necessarily solves it. But it does need to be solved one way or the other. And the roadmap that you're discussing about, well, let's just mitigate risk and wait for the other guys to screw up. That's a great strategy to win government about once every 15 years. And then the mandate you will get from the people is, well, we want you to have the same policies that the last people had, being liberals, but we just want you to run a competent liberal government, balance liberal budget, things of this nature. And so I think that mindset needs to go one way or the other. And maybe this convention will be the beginning of it. We'll see what the discussions are like, but the proof is clearly in the pudding. This is now the fourth election in a row where the party has failed to form government.
And I would agree that in a certain sense, the personnel takes second seat in terms of importance to things like nominations, how nominations and appointments are being done. Because if you have proper rules that restrict the way that people are kicked out of nominations arbitrarily, or that require more transparency around appointments, then you will kind of cut that off as an avenue for people to basically give out positions to friends and whatnot. Because the funny thing is that it's not like they're picking the guy who can truly win. Oftentimes, when somebody can't win a nomination themselves, then it's kind of a a bit of a glaring issue that they're probably not going to be able to beat a liberal who's not going to be able. You're not going to be able to kick the liberal you're running against out of the race. You're going to have to fight him, and if you can't fight fellow conservatives for the nomination, that's a problem. That happened in mine. Someone was favored by the party. I have text messages to prove that they are favored. They literally had a Jenny Byrne and Associates lobbyist going door knocking with them. And that person, they kicked me out of the race. They kicked another person out of the race. They found another excuse to disallow another guy. I mobilized my people to vote down ballot anybody but this party favorite. They lost the nomination still, despite the fact they were going around saying to people they had 1,500 memberships. Nonsense. They did not. And then, so they lost that. And then they were appointed into another riding in Calgary. And they were the only ones, I'm just being nice by not naming them because it's very easy to look up who it was. They were the only one to lose one of the Calgary ridings in a riding that was probably safer than Calgary Center. And somehow Greg McLean held on to Calgary Center. And it's like, do they not learn the lesson that if you're going to run, frankly, mediocre loser candidates who have track records of losing, they don't connect with people very well. They may be good at the function of campaigning, getting to doors, talking to people, handing out lit, but if they're not connecting with people, if they're not compelling, stop letting them run. Like we had this in so many areas where we could have won that riding, but we ran the wrong person. In Mississauga and Brampton, the story of those cities was that every Hindu candidate who ran got kicked out. And guess what? Hindus are not collectivistic people. If you actually look at a map of where Hindu Canadians live, it's just shotgunned everywhere. They really don't concentrate anywhere specific. You know, a little bit more in places like Brampton and Mississauga than general, maybe 10% of the population. Some of those areas, 15%. But when you kick out every one of their candidates, they might become a little more collectivist and say, well, screw you, I'm not showing up, because they didn't require the candidate to be Hindu for them to vote. But when you're basically telling them we don't want you, they will leave. The PPC literally gained votes in Brampton and Mississauga. I'm not sure if you know this. They collapsed 5% nationally to 0.7%, but in Mississauga, they went from 2% to 4.5%.
That's actually fascinating. I didn't know that at all. I should really go back into my numbers and see where the PPC gained in each individual riding, because I have that in in my spreadsheets. That's really fascinating stuff. And listen, like that's I would say a proof point to solidify your overall point. I would also say that the reason that the party does this, want perpetual losers like Jeremy Nixon, and I don't mind saying that because he voted to not have on the committee when Jason was premier, to have a bill put forward by our friend Dan Williams on conscientious rejection rights when it comes to assisted suicide for healthcare professionals. He helped kill that in committee.
He also went around claiming he's pro-life, and that is like the bare minimum pro-life policy he stumped against. Literally joined with hyper-progressive socialists like Janice Irwin to kill the bill in committee. And it's like, that's like unforgivable. This is saying basically a doctor is allowed to say, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to recommend that. And I remember in the committee, he says, I believe in conscience rights, but I also believe in equal access to healthcare and non-discriminatory access to healthcare. It's like, so you don't understand conscience rights if you don't understand that you're supposed to be able to discriminate on things that you're willing and not willing to do. That's not discriminate. That's not like bigoted discrimination. That's saying, I don't want to recommend an abortion service to you. I don't want to recommend MAID. I don't want to take part in doing MAID.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm glad that he's lost again for like the umpteenth time. He lost in the provincial election, rightfully so. And guess what? We didn't help his riding, and we sent volunteers to other ridings. And that's what we did federally as well. We don't support pro-abortion conservative candidates, and we only support pro-life conservative candidates who did much better compared to pro-abortion ones. But another thing,
it turns out that candidates who passionately believe in things do better than ones who take part in apathetic commerce politics. Hey, I'll give you a tax credit if you install, LED lights in your home. It's like, what? And the thing is, again, that's always the funny thing, is they always try and knock out pro-life candidates based on the idea, oh, it's a risk. Can this person win? They usually win. Most of the people in the Conservative Party, most MPs elected are pro-life at this point.
Yeah, so it's about there are at least 90 pro-lifers within 140 44 conservative MPs in that caucus, and the numbers probably, like, when legislation actually hits, they'll probably be well over 100. So now what we're talking, 10 out of 14, so that's 5 out of 7. Like we're talking like close to 80% of the caucus probably being pro-life. And the other thing too is when we look at our numbers, pro-life conservatives who got elected had about 5,000 extra votes than the pro-abortion conservatives who got elected, which are, less than 30 at this point, from what we can tell. And then for the pro-lifers, conservative candidates that lost in the last election, they lost by 4,500 actually votes fewer than the pro-abortion conservatives who lost. So there's always a premium in that regard. And whether it's a pro-life issue or a different issue, when you have candidates that actually care about issues and they want to go and talk about it, you're going to have a stronger party for it, especially for a conservative party that seems to be perpetually stuck in opposition. So if you just want your milk toast, I call them Paulabots, like repeat acts of tax, build the home, stop the crime, fix the budget, not even balance the budget, fix the budget, which they didn't even propose to do. It's just perpetual deficits, just slightly smaller than Carney's. You're gonna get those results. The other thing too is when you get people who are actually passionate about issues, and I think one candidate or member of parliament that's a great example of this is Jamil Javani and the issues that he's talking about. He had a great 3-part series, video series about the importance of fathers around Father's Day. That's the type of cultural, social stuff that conservative MPs can easily do, right? He had the petition regarding the burning of the churches in the last parliament. He has a petition going on right now regarding temporary foreign workers. Taking stances on these issues, discussing issues as they arise. If the leader isn't willing to do it, but you have a bunch of caucus members who are willing to talk about these issues, that will permeate through the caucus, it'll permeate through the party, and will help exorcise, with an O, this terrible plague of a mindset that has plagued the party since Harper, probably toward the end of the Harper years, of just being, let's just mitigate the risk and just wait for the other guys to screw up. No, you actually have to go out there, you have to take policy position stances, and you have to get out there and actually go and convert people to your policy stances. Mm-hmm. That's how you go and grow your base. There's many people talking about, we need to grow the conservative base. We need to grow the conservative base. But the best way to grow the conservative base is go out and convert people to conservatism if you actually want to go and win elections.
Well, this is what I was telling people, because your base, especially I find sometimes the Conservative Party, and probably all parties, don't, oh my goodness, my voice is just off, but parties don't understand their own bases. The Conservative Party base are frankly not the people who show up to Pierre Poilievre rallies. Those are like your really turned on party fans. They really like Pierre Poilievre. Nothing wrong with it, obviously.
I wouldn't even say they're party fans. I would say they're Pierre fans.
Yeah, Pierre fans. Yeah. In the sense that they want to see Pierre, they really like him, and that's totally fine. They've probably been voting conservative for a long time. But my thing is that your base...
I would argue not. I would argue those people at the rallies, I would argue a lot of them have not been voting, period, at all for a really long time.
Fair enough. Well, at the very least, my thing is that your true base are the silent individuals who tend to always show up and vote for you. But if you start really taking them for granted, you might start having their turnout drop. If they were forced to vote, they'd probably vote for you. But if you really start going away from the things that caused them to show up for the last 20 years on most elections, they'll stay home. So I always now say, your base as a Conservative Party is the 54-year-old Presbyterian or Baptist lady who really wants to show up and vote for you guys. But when they heard that you threw Arnold Viersen under the bus for being pro-life, maybe she still showed up to vote, but there's thousands of her, hundreds of thousands of her across the country, and maybe they turned out at 60% rather than what you'd like from those people at 85%. And that's the problem. Nobody's ever going to send you an email saying they're not showing up. They just don't show up. Yeah. And I think that this election, when I saw it was 68.5% turnout, there's so many moments where I'm like, you didn't get your interest groups out. You didn't get the people who should want to come out for you to feel the need to show up, because the group shows up, but it's how much of the group shows up. It's always that margin. I was thinking during the election, what you should do, like I always recommend run pro-life because you'll do better objectively. But even if the leader and certain people don't want to do that, send Arnold Viersen, send like Garnet Genuine, send Leslyn Lewis on a church tour. They go to every single church in the GTA, at least dropping off literature, talking to pastors, basically telling them what they're going to do. And guess what? You have a second like rally campaign going on, because the problem is it was just Poilievre. It was Poilievre and a little bit of Melissa Lantsman doing rallies. Everyone else, and I think I heard this from not you, it was someone else, saying that candidates were literally told not to even leave their
Yeah.
riding during the campaign. You could be in the most safe of safe ridings, but unless you got express written permission, which they probably wouldn't want to give you, you could not leave your jurisdiction to go help your neighbor who may be in trouble.
Yeah, there were only 5 MPs that were allowed to leave their ridings. It was Melissa Lantsman, Andrew Scheer, um, Michelle Rempel Garner, and there were 2 others, and I'm not aware who the other 2 were, but those are the only 5 that were allowed to leave their ridings. Yeah, and I think, you know what, like, the other thing that's going to be interesting is when Pierre comes back to the House of Commons. Probably I'm assuming he's going to be winning, of course, that by-election. It will probably be called this Sunday. For the Tuesday after the civic holiday in August in rural Alberta. When he does return to the House of Commons, it's going to be a different dynamic because you have a different makeup of caucus. You have, your Aaron Guns, your Andrew Lawtons, your Dr. Strauss's. Jamil was there beforehand, but now you have Jamil on steroids, so to speak.
I would almost turn that into like a bit of the podcast radio show host faction of the party that's actually oddly growing. People who may have not hosted their own shows, like Matt Strauss. To my knowledge, he's never had his own YouTube channel or radio show.
I don't believe so. Yeah.
The way Jamil and Lawton and Aaron Gunn as a documentarian have. But people who know how to get attention, they know how to take an issue, market the issue, win on the issue. And I hopefully that shakes things up. So you don't get people who are nervous saying, well, I wasn't told I can say that, so I'm not going to do it. It's like, just do it. That's why I like Jamil, because it seems like he just does what he wants. And let the party get mad at me because I'm right. And they're going to realize I'm right. And that's the problem I already see in how like the shadow cabinets put together.
Yeah.
There's faces in there who I don't know what benefit we get from them. I don't know why they're there. I'll just name one of them. I don't know what we're getting from Jisraj Halan. Is he somebody who set the world on fire when it comes to finance policy? I don't know. I don't even know what he does.
These are all very legitimate questions, and I think that the relationship between Pierre, his office, and the caucus that existed in the 44th Parliament is not going to be same in the 45th. And I think that he needs to come into this 45th Parliament once he's elected as a member of Parliament, and he comes back into the House of Commons as leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. I think it would behoove him to really understand that relationship is not going to be the same, because if he tries to have the same controlling relationship that he did last time, I think that's going to have a negative effect on him. Now you want to talk about convention. Well, guess what? MPs go to convention. They bring oftentimes their boards. Typically it's most of the time, a lot of the delegates that go for each riding association are the board members of the EDA board. And they typically to be loyalists to their MP, or at least to their candidate, typically. And if you start pissing off members of caucus over the autumn sitting of this parliament, of this session, then I think Calgary starts to change a little bit for him in that leadership question. So he's got to be a little bit careful in that regard. So it's there. These MPs are in there that are looking to shake things up. I hope that, again, that permeates through the party overall. But if there's any resistance specifically from the leader himself, and we've yet to see if there is going to be that type of resistance, I think that will have a negative effect on him for that leadership vote come convention.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the key word here is, like, in terms of what needs to be done, is just freedom. Less
Wasn't that what
gatekeeping.
is that what he ran on? Like,
I know, and that's the ironic thing is that, guys, less gatekeeping, more freedom. If it's a good policy for how the country should be run, it's a good policy for how the party should be run. Let good ideas win, let bad ideas fail. Because right now, by doing the risk mitigation, they're letting some of their old ideas stick around that really should have been thrown away. And they're not letting in any new ideas to kind of like compete and show that, no, this actually does win. Again, on the pro-life thing, which I feel more compelled to bring up since you're here. But like on the pro-life issue too, I always tell people, because I always have audience members saying, well, if you run on that, you're going to lose. It's like, guys, if you were on the debate stage with Mark Carney or Justin Trudeau or whatever liberal, and you
Especially
said,
Justin Trudeau.
yeah, what's your favorite thing about a ninth-month abortion that causes you to say that you want us to keep that illegal? What is your favorite thing of a sex-selective abortion? Why should we? What's your argument for eliminating the mentally unwell using assisted suicide? It's like they don't have an answer because they've never actually had to answer stuff like that, justify just the insane policies that are currently active in Canada, like zero abortion restrictions, crazy amounts of maid application. That's you could obviously hit them on that, but it's like, ooh, but that's controversial. Controversial doesn't mean anything bad. It means it's something that it causes a buzz. People talk about it. And all these are 80-20 issues. Yeah, there's
Yes.
going to be a big blow up from the media because they're all a bunch of pro-abortion hacks. But again, people who are going to be reading the article and hearing what you said and what the other guy said, they're going to say, well, he's right. And that's all you're trying to do. It doesn't matter if the media hates you. If at least they wrote down what you said, if people read it, even if they're still reading mainstream news, they will read that and be like, well, he's kind of right. And that's all you need.
Well, and here's the danger right now for the Conservative Party of Canada is that your opponent is not Justin Trudeau, right? So for the Liberal Party of Canada, they don't have anything in their constitution that says, you must be pro-abortion in order to be a nomination contestant and a candidate for us. All that Justin Trudeau said is that I'm going to use the clause within the Canada Elections Act that says that if you want a registered party name behind a candidate's name on a ballot, the executive director for that registered party of Elections Canada has to give the okay. And all he said was, if you're pro-life and you legitimately win a nomination race within the Liberal Party of Canada and we find out that you're pro-life, I'm going to tell the executive director to not give Elections Canada that you are going to be one of our candidates, and we'll appoint someone else or whatever. You still get to be a candidate on the ballot, of course. You just don't get Liberal behind you. We don't know for sure if Mark Carney is going to keep that or not. As far as we know, he isn't. If there is a piece of pro-life legislation that comes up in this 45th Parliament, whether it be with assisted suicide or abortion, we don't know if Mark Carney is going to whip his caucus because it's not required within the Liberal Party of Canada Constitution. He very well might not. And on top of that, not that I think this will happen, but it's much more likely to happen under Carney than Trudeau, which is still not likely overall. But he could move on these issues himself and not wait for the Conservatives if it comes up in the media. For example, we have the sunset clause, right, for the assisted suicide statute that says that, we're going to study about the expansion of assisted suicide to those with mental health challenges. And within a certain amount of time, then that's just going to be automatic. He could move on that before the Conservatives and say, we're going to get rid of that sunset clause and we're going to pull back on that. And we're not going to extend the criteria to those with mental health challenges. He might even go and get rid of some of the track 2 stuff for assisted suicide. He might move faster on sex selective abortion. I'm not saying that he will do these things. I'm not saying the likelihood of these things is particularly high.
It's a scenario that if he does it, takes a baton away from his opponents, because we see Carney is at least willing to do this on economic issues. So if he moves on to social issues and does, maybe he puts forward a bill to protect historical churches or something like that. And the party that hasn't really, like the Conservative Party, hasn't really talked as much about church burnings and whatnot that have been going on. But if he has some historical site and religious building protection act or whatever, he's going to get the credit, because politics isn't people on Twitter who knew everything that happened over the past 10 years. And when the Liberals do it, they're going to see, hypocrisy. The average person reading the paper is not going to think, hypocrisy. They're going to be like, well, that sounds good.
Yep. They don't have time to consume that. And the other thing too is the other risk I would say to the Conservatives is that you already see a little bit of this in the social issue category. Like I would be very, very wary if I were, working in Party HQ or the OLO. And one example, the example I think of is the raising of the pride flag or whatever the hell it's called on the parliamentary precinct. Carney had like a 15-second video about it from his personal Twitter and then the Prime Minister's official Twitter account, and that was it. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's all we hear from the Prime Minister personally on the issue of pride during quote-unquote pride season. Whereas Trudeau, before him, like he was leading the frickin' parade going down in Toronto and Montreal or Vancouver or whatever. You're not going to see that. I highly doubt from Carney.
It's just
That's
not his
already
personality to even get in front of a parade.
there's that too, but that's already a massive change, right? So to go from that to, hey, we're not going to allow um, sex changes, castrations, whatever you want to call them for minors, that's not as big of a jump for him to make as it was for Trudeau. So the risk of the Liberals under Carney moving on these files faster than the Conservatives is much higher than it was with Trudeau as leader. I still don't think it's a high risk overall,
Well,
but the risk
again,
is definitely raised.
it's just that this is why the Conservatives need to move faster on things,
Yeah,
because maybe it's just a 1% risk on some of these issues. But if you line up enough of these small 1, 5, 7, 10% risks that in 3 years they're going to say something before you do, well, they're ripping issues away from you,
yeah.
and your own base is going to look at you saying, like, what are you guys doing? Why is it that they're the ones leading on policy when you're in opposition and you can say whatever you want?
Yeah, and the other thing too is they don't have to worry about the NDP, right? It's I don't think the NDP is dead. I think the NDP will come back. Will they win 100 seats like they did under Jack Layton? I don't know.
Don Davies does seem more competent. Like, I think he understands the task
Don
at hand.
Don Mania is a real thing, man.
I know, but he seems more competent in the sense that in 2004, Layton understood that you have to pull the plug on the government
Yeah,
if you want to gain. And I think Don Davies, by voting with the Conservatives on several of these motions and saying, I'm not going to vote for the throne speech, he's rattling the cage more and proving, hey, the NDP's back. And it kind of makes sense. He's like an old Teamsters lawyer.
yes,
And so I think he's trying to recapture not just urban progressives, but I think he's also trying to recapture hard hat wearing union men. Which
which is
the
which is
problem with
more
that
for
is that
risk.
that's who the Conservatives won, and that's why we
Exactly,
won Windsor and
exactly.
Hamilton ridings. It's because those working class guys went NDP to Conservative. And if Don Davies proves good at getting those guys to come back, that's going to hurt the Conservatives more than it's going to hurt the Liberals. So that's where, again, if the Conservatives want to solidify all their gains and then potentially gain more, you got to get more intense. Not intense throwing chairs around or whatever, but you got to toughen up on policy so that people actually look around and they realize, oh, that's why I voted for them. Because if you go too silent, people are going to be like, why was I voting Conservative again? I don't even remember what these guys like.
Yeah,
You have
and
to
and
keep repeating.
and we're already seeing that. Like there isn't a ton of polling post election yet, and I think a lot of polling firms aren't going to be wasting their time and resources on that for two things. Number one, it's pretty close after an election, so like not much is probably going to change from the results
Honeymoon
of the election.
polling isn't that interesting,
Exactly, and we're
even
going.
Poilievre's own polling isn't that bad. When you actually pull his own approval, Spark Research just put one out. Yes, Carney has like a 67 or 63% approval rating right now, but Poilievre is still positive. He actually has 51 to like 49, which isn't bad. Uh,
Yeah,
but the
and he's
problem is everyone after the election always pretends they voted for whoever won.
yeah, and like, listen, it's a new like conservatives have to stop pretending that this isn't a new government. It is a new government. Technically, constitutionally, it's a new government because it's a new premiership, and they're very much acting like it. So to say like, oh well, the lost liberal decade, this is a fourth liberal term. Everybody out there, myself included, are treating this as a first term government, right? And when a first term government comes in and they come up with a new policy program and they actually act on it, like the Carney government is, it's exciting. It is exciting. The other two is we're going to the summer, so like people are really starting to check out. The Oilers, made it to Game 6 in the Stanley Cup Final. You have football
Oh,
starting up. The
I'm
Jays
sorry.
are
Did you
doing well.
see Jenny Byrne tweeting out
I
about?
we could get to that. We could get to
Okay,
that because
okay.
I was really proud of my retweet on that, but she deleted the tweet, so it didn't. It's now gone. But I have the screenshot. I'll send it to you actually. But my point being is that we don't see many numbers. The numbers that we do see, because Nanos does his weekly rolling poll, which goes up and down or whatever, but you take the average out and there's a trend. The trend is probably correct when you look at 3 of his weeks out of the 4. One of the trends that we see is that as the conservatives are coming down in the Nanos polling, the NDP are going up and the liberals are staying the same. And I think you're all I don't think I know you're onto something, Wyatt, and the polling is behind you on it when you say you have to be careful with the NDP coming back up, because it doesn't necessarily, does it hurt the liberals? Sure. But I think proportionally, it hurts the Conservatives a lot more, and especially in the seat counts. So what I was getting back at with when you're talking about, well, the Liberals just have to, there's maybe a 1% risk they're going to move on this like hardcore conservative issue, but they only need to do that on like 3, 4, 5 issues over the next, let's say, year and a half. And like people start wondering, well, what the hell, what are the Conservatives doing under Poilievre or whoever's leader at the time? They don't have to worry about their left flank because even if the NDP do come back, they're not coming back with like much more than 12 seats. They'll come back with like maybe 20 at most, right? It'll take time because money does matter in politics, and you have to run campaigns and run an office and all that type of stuff. It's going to take time for the NDP to come back. But even the NDP do come back, in terms of seats, it might not hurt the Liberals basically at all, and it might hurt the Conservatives. So
Like
if
if
I
the
were the
Greens started rising, the Liberals would get worried because the only
yeah,
people voting Green are like urban or suburban progressives. And so those are usually default. Those people can kind of swing between any of the left-wing parties. And again, with NDP, there are blue NDP voters. There are blue
well,
collar
so
plumbers who used to vote NDP under Leighton, but now they
if
vote for the Conservatives. But if the Conservatives again, don't feel like again, that's actually why cultural issues matter. Who is
huge,
the guy who what podcast does the guy
exactly,
who is the plumber listening to at work?
exactly.
He's not listening to, frankly, he's not probably listening to me. He's probably listening to like people who are probably even a little bit edgier than me. So the party needs to not kind of come off as soft and waiting, government and waiting and whatnot. That's not going to mean anything to the plumber. He wants you to be like trying to bash down the pillars of the government now.
These are pro-union, social and cultural conservatives. What really hit me was way back when, in 2008 or 2009. So talking about party AGM. So here in Manitoba, where I'm from, the NDP and the Progressive Conservatives, they have their AGMs obviously every year, annual general meeting, and they always flip between Winnipeg, Brandon, Winnipeg, Brandon. And so one year they came to my hometown, Brandon, the NDP. And the guy who was supposed to go there as the official representative of the Progressive Conservatives, because political parties for their party conventions, they will allow representatives from other political parties to come just to see how things are. Some logistical things like how do you run this, like this stage work, that type of stuff. You're basically granted access everywhere. You can't vote,
Yeah.
obviously, but you can.
No,
Yeah.
it's they're going to send spies anyway, so why not let the spies in?
Well, and like it's a kind of like a camaraderie thing. Like, oh, you're interested in politics and you have a different worldview, and it's just interesting too. And they actually treat you quite well because like they kind of give you a tour, they introduce you to different people. I actually got to meet Jack Layton at that party policy convention provincially because he was the guest speaker for them. And this is when the NDP were in government provincially in Manitoba. So, anyways, I wasn't supposed to go. It was a buddy of mine and who's from Winnipeg, and he said, I think he was campaigning down in the States at the time for like the McCain campaign or something like that. So he said, like, I'll actually be gone. Do you mind doing this for the party? And I said, this is kind of a cool opportunity. And then like I was to provide a report to the party and everything like that. I think I might still have it actually. So I did, and I had a great time. But what really hit me, why it was at that NDP policy convention, you had like a row of people, delegates, right, from a riding. And this was like a suburban provincial riding in Winnipeg. And of like their 10 delegates or whatever, you had like your metrosexual whatever. And then you also had beside them like the local 380 jean jacket private sector union guys. And they had like nothing to do with each other at the table. They didn't talk to each other. Like at the events, like one was grabbing a martini, the other was grabbing a beer. Personally, I like both, and I drank both. But my point being is that there is a huge cultural divide within that party, and that is reflective at the federal level as well. So if you want to keep these people in the Windsors, in the Hamiltons, in the Winnipegs, in the interior of BC, and the North Island where Aaron Gunn is, you're going to have to talk about issues that the NDP aren't willing to go toward. And that includes cultural and social issues. And I don't see the Conservative Party doing that right now. And I hope that they learn, and I hope Pierre does learn. But if they don't start doing that, these poll numbers aren't going to get any better. So even if the Liberals just stay the same at like 44, 45%, you could see, the NDP go up to 15 and the Conservatives go down to like 33 or so. And that's not going to be good for Pierre going into the convention.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. I see a lot of issues, even issues that are 60-40, where the 60 are being occupied by the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens right now in the bloc. Why not take the 40? You're
That's
going to
a
be
classic Jason Kenney strategy.
Yeah, you always take the 40 on these. Yeah, but the thing is, even then, the cultural issues, it's more like a 60-40 in favor of the more conservative, socially conservative position. I find that they constantly drop the ball on those. But anyways,
how is it that Prime Minister Mark Carney has His Majesty the King come and do the speech from the throne, and that one of the very first things that Mark Carney said when he became prime minister, when he was sworn in by Her Excellency the Governor General, this is before the election, right? This is mid-March 2025, was one of the very first things he said to the media, that Canada is a nation founded on three peoples, on the British, on the French, on the Indigenous. And it's accurate, and it's true, and it's historic, and it goes to our heritage. It's what makes us unique from the Americans, and does make us unique from every other country in the world. And how is it that a Liberal was talking about that, but for the previous 13 years when Justin Trudeau was leader of the Liberal Party and eventually Prime Minister, you didn't hear any Conservative really talk in those types of terms? Again, ceding ground on those cultural issues. It's a small thing, but you've already ceded the ground to Carney on that, because if you start talking in that way, which we should as Conservatives, it's a me too. You're Johnny come lately. You're behind the eight ball on it.
Yeah, no, and fair enough. The only thing I didn't like about the King's speech, or the main thing, is it was like this feels like the Governor General should be reading it. They really should have jazzed it up a little bit more if it's the King. It felt like a British tourist showed up and he's like, there's some dental plan that I guess Canadians are getting. That's cool. And they have, free parking. It's like it was a little. They needed to probably, make it a little more high-minded sounding if you're gonna.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, thanks for coming on to the show, Scott. Your website, I believe it's startsrightnow.ca or .com. Is it both?
.ca? Yep. .ca. I think .com as well gets you to .ca. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think we're on TikTok.
And I'm going to link the website in the description below, because I recommend, if you guys want to be not only want to volunteer for campaigns, but if you want to volunteer for the right people, make sure to go through Right Now, because they'll actually find Conservatives who are social and cultural Conservatives who you can get behind. And so I think that's very important, that you are not just getting involved in politics, you're getting involved in the areas that are going to have the most impact for the best possible candidates.
Yeah, we had 1,500 of our supporters go out and volunteer for about 30 pro-life Conservative candidates in really tight ridings in this past election. And the vast majority of them, not all of them, but the vast majority of them got elected, and it did make the difference. So, yeah.
People don't seem to realize that they think that everyone's opinions are baked in, because your own opinions tend to be baked in if you're very involved in politics. Most people just need you to say a couple words and they're like, oh, okay, fair enough. Then they'll show up and vote. It's very subtle. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions, and you're not there to educate them, tell them tell them what for. But if you just talk to them, oftentimes just having a good interaction with a volunteer from that party flips people.
Exactly.
People are very simple. They just want a party of people that they could imagine being with. And if you're a nice guy and they're like, I could be in the same party as that guy, I'll go vote for them. That's actually how simple it is.
Yeah, it's oftentimes, the vast majority of the time, it's this nice young man, this nice young lady came to my door, said hi. They were from the Conservative candidate who, I checked out, seems fine. Yeah, I think I'm going to go and mark an X beside that candidate's name for election day.
Because most ridings that are won outside of the rural ridings for the Conservatives and the deep urban ridings for the Liberals, it's won on the margins. It's one trying to take this group of 500 people and move them over to your camp, which is a swing of 1,000.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyways, well, thanks for coming on, Scott. Definitely we'll be having you on again as we move towards the convention, if any big developments happen, or if any, big policy issues come up. But again, thanks for coming on the show. And I guess hell, in my own audience, like, share, subscribe, do all that great stuff. See you guys later.
Bye for now.